Matt Thieleman, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
Thanks, Robbie. You got it right.
I did. We were just doing a name jokes, talking about origins of your surname. Is it the same? Is it a German name? Not what I thought, a Belgian name, like the Premier League footballer with a similar name. I'm very aware as somebody who, weirdly, Robbie gets messed around with by people unconsciously more than Swale. I get like Robin, Robbie spelt in weird ways. I'm always quite aware that it's nice to be able to say someone's actual name. Although another guest I recorded with recently has a fantastic Catalan name, which I gotta say, I did not nail. But yeah, Matt, so lovely to have you here and to get to speak to you. And people who have been long-time listeners to the show will remember one of my favorite episodes with Toku McCree, who is in some ways is partly why we're here. We were just saying partly it's because of the work you do, and I was, your machine had already made me aware of you and that kind of thing. But Toku made this beautiful introduction where he said, to me, Matt is integrity, possibility, depth, love. What an introduction that is, eh?
Thanks, Toku.
Yeah. Yeah, so people who like that episode can now know that Toku knows something about what we might get in this conversation. And this is chat that could have been chat before we switched on, actually. But it is not now because we've already started. Like, I was reading the acknowledgements of your book, and you name some of the people that you know, particularly from the Prosperous Coach community. And I was wondering if we were, like, we might have been in that, those kind of communities, they go through life cycles, right? Some people are around a long time, but a few of those names were familiar. Aaron Caulfield, Mike Harris, like I was at some of those things. I wonder if we were at, did you go to any Prosperous Coach intensives?
This is actually a hilarious story. I was at April 2019 in San Diego.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't there. Yeah, I did London 2017, and then Santa Monica 2018, I think.
Okay, so you were a little bit, because I never got to meet some of the folks I mentioned. I never met them in person through Rich's community. I just knew them online. Like they were all Toku, Adam Bay, some of those folks. But this is what's the funny story is I'm in a coach community called Pylea. I was CEO of that organization for about a year. And one of the coaches in there who I've known for a year now, Jomar Gomez, he's a great guy. 2 weeks ago, he texted me and he says, "Where were you on this day in April of 2019?" And I was like, "I don't know, probably at home in Michigan." He was like, "Wrong. You're in San Diego." And he sends me a picture of someone who was there at the event. He was like, "We were in the same small group and neither of us remember each other."
So, you and this person were there?
Joe,
the same small group? Wow.
Yeah, he was like, he remembered the other person who was in the picture with me.
Yeah.
So he and I were in a small group of 10, completely forgot seeing each other. And once he said, I was like, oh yeah, I remember there was a guy who had really good shoes who dressed well from LA. And I was like, that was you.
Yeah, you could I can see you, for people who are listening, you're gesturing to like a place in the circle. And I can really imagine that, he was sat over there. It's like, you could probably from some of those events, they're really memorable, right? They're very evocative. So I can kind of remember sitting in the foyer of the hotel in Santa Monica that we were in with the small group that I was in that day. I couldn't name everybody that was in that group, but I could tell you some of them. And I can see like the place and where, Daniel, who sadly died since then, and Louise, and I can kind of see them, Simon, I remember where he was. They're nice. Like those places are really memorable. I thought that story was going to be, maybe it was that he got, because we're recording not that long after April, whatever it was, that he got like a Google Photos or something like, on this day,
I think
4 years ago. And then it's like, wait, it's this guy, on Facebook.
That was exactly it as a Facebook one. So he was like, today I learned that Matt and I were here together. So that was a fun time. Actually, at that event was another guest you've had, Chris Joseph.
Yeah.
He's a great guy. Great guy.
Really good guy. Yeah. People should. That was a lovely conversation that Chris and I had, actually. We connected. I don't even remember why, really. We didn't meet through Rich's community. We connected somehow. We'd maybe seen each other in the online bits, and we connected somehow, and then he came on, and I really loved that conversation. I felt like we really touched into his story in a really beautiful way. And he has a way about him. So I love that one. People can check that one out too. This is a fun way for us to kind of I guess I did it, didn't I, by naming Toku as the kind of some of the catalysts for this conversation. It's a fun way for people to get a bit of a sense of part of your journey as a coach. And you've mentioned, how do I say it? Pilea? Is that what is that how you said it? Or
Pilea.
Pilea.
Yeah, so it's named after a plant.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately I don't have around me to show you.
Yeah. People can Google that. Or we can put a link to Pilea in the show notes. No, we don't have to do that, Steve, who does the show notes. So like I want to touch in on that. I have lots of curiosity about Pilea, and I'm sure we'll get to the prosperous coach and some of those people and their roles in your journey. But the place, and we might go back further than this, the place that'd be fun to go now is this thing, coaching. Matt's just published a book, everybody listening, called This Is Coaching. Yeah. So this thing, coaching, that you have a book called This Is. When did you first hear about it, know about it? I guess, it may have been there was sports coaching and things like that before it, and maybe that was where it came. But in the way that you think about it, that book is in some way describing.
In a way that I actually took seriously. So yes to sports coaching. I played baseball for more than 20 years. So when I was 5 to 27, I played baseball, and played lots of sports. So I was really familiar with the concept of sports coaching. But this idea of transformational coaching, of the type of coaching that we do, I did not know about seriously until we'll say 2015, 2016. At that point,
did you know about it unseriously? Had you got at that point? Yeah, did you have some impression of weird hippie cults, or I don't know what it would be impression that you would have had?
I studied psychology and sociology in college. I was quite familiar with the idea of clinical psychology and therapists. I had a therapist in my early 20s, starting, and probably when I was a kid. I went to therapy when I was a kid too. But I had this idea of, you get trained to be a therapist. That gives you sort of permission and right to talk about feelings with people and to sit with them. And anyone who calls himself a coach, I had this very vague idea of it being pseudoscientific kind of BS. It's such an irony that for 20 something years of my life, I denied a massive part of me, which is this spiritual woo-woo kooky person who believes in this the power of conversation to transform lives. It is my life, and for 20 something years I completely denied it as nonsense. I remember my mom had the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, which is I dismissed it for 5 years. I'm not going to read that. It's BS. It's pseudoscience talking about decisions before decisions. It's nonsense self-help crap. I'm not going to read it. I have no idea actually where that was based in, but that was my life. And I just wholeheartedly dismissed this whole industry because that was how I thought about things. And so I thought, oh, this is people who are just motivational speakers. They get on stage, they get people amped up, or they go in, they charge a whole bunch of money as consultants to, again, get people hyped up and to teach them the stuff that we all already know, which is make goals and do the stuff. Right? It's not hard. That was my whole perspective. And the way that I allowed myself to open to it is that I started, I had a career as a marketer, and largely saw the way that I describe it is that leadership as a model is broken. We have a lot of people who are disengaged at work. We have a lot of people who are unhappy at work. We have a lot of toxic cultures where people don't really like to go in to do the thing that they spend most of their life doing. And that was my experience generally of the business world. And so I started, I identified mindfulness as a tool to help us to open a door to speak about leadership in the way that I thought it could be spoken about. And I'm not kidding. As I started to get speaking opportunities in this, I put coaching on my website because I thought, oh, coaches get paid a bunch of money. I'll just sit with someone, I'll tell them what to do, and that's coaching. And then someone saw me speak and they asked me to coach them. And I literally Googled, how do I onboard a coaching client? And as I said yes to coaching them, made up a rate, they said yes, and then I started doing it, but I had no idea what I was doing. But it was like a couple of conversations in when I was like, oh, this thing is really special. Like just having the opportunity to sit with someone who is not in our day-to-day, who has a different perspective, who's willing to ask us questions or point to things that are really uncomfortable for us, that causes something to happen differently. And I actually don't need to know all the answers in order to help. And so there's like, that was kind of like the door creaking open for me to see that maybe all this stuff that people are talking about isn't nonsense.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots in there that I'm curious about. The first one was, when you say that for 20 something years, you dismissed this kooky woo woo spiritual side of you, I guess I kind of heard that in one way and then suddenly saw it in another. And I'm curious if either of these is right or if it's something different.
Yeah.
Is that when you look back now, you can see that there was always this spiritual woo-woo kooky side? Or is it that something about the transformation that's happened over the last few years has opened that up, or maybe both, but has developed that side of you? And like,
No,
what
he
were you
was
dismissing?
always there.
He was
He
always
was
there.
always there. He was always there, really curious, and it felt largely unsafe to explore that side. And I got love and belonging by knowing all of the answers. I was really good at school. In fact, Toku gave me some feedback, as he was one of the first readers of my book. So I speak in the very intro about being class valedictorian in high school. It was not that big of a deal to me. In fact, it felt as if it was a requirement for me to actually continue to receive love. So I dismiss it. I don't like own that part of me that much. It was just kind of like how life had to be, because I still see it as like there's a part of me that still wishes that I had been reading Malcolm Gladwell when I was in high school, that I had been listening to even like Tony Robbins when I was growing up, that I had been, like just diving into Wayne Dyer, who's from Michigan, where I'm from. I'm like, oh my gosh, like we have this connection, and all of that felt absurd. It was like, no one will take me seriously. They won't see the part of me that is actually brilliant and smart and capable and hardworking if I allow this sort of spiritual side, this other side, to be seen.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And are there memories from your, I don't know, childhood, adolescence, early 20s of that? Like, how did it show itself, that part of you, even in tiny ways or even just to you? Because it must have been there. It must have been kind of doing something in that time.
Yeah. When I was like in second or third grade, I would devour books on Greek mythology.
Yeah.
So mythology, which has always been like the stories of how we are as humans, I've just like always been massively interesting. When I was in high school, I was very fascinated in Buddhism and the sort of Tibetan culture and that way of being. And so it's manifested in these curiosities and things that were like close enough that it felt safe to like dive into a bit. And I've always, I don't know, always, but say since high school, had a perspective on organized religion that is like, hey, I don't understand how the Christian version of God would send all of these people to hell and say they cannot be redeemed simply because it was before Jesus was born, or simply because they grew up on the other side of the world. Like that just doesn't, that like never made sense to me. And so I remember a conversation, I think in high school, I was like, I remember being, speaking of like having the memory of the place, I was in my basement doing laundry with my mom, and I said, and she was like, she was like, I'm a bit nervous or worried that you're not religious, that you don't have anything to hold on to. And I was like, no, Mom, look, I'm maybe not religious, but I'm deeply spiritual. And I believe that every God exists so long as we believe in it. And like, I look back, I'm like, why, how did I say that in high school? Like, I was not like in an environment of learning that, but it was like, that belief system was sort of in my essence since I was quite young.
Yeah, what a thing, like what a beautiful memory thing to remember. And yeah, like it sounds like you didn't if I don't know if I got this quite right, but if the valedictorian in you is still worried that you weren't reading Tony Robbins earlier, because if you've been reading that, you'd be better. It sounds like you were doing something early on that allows you, aged whatever you just said, to say that to your mum in the basement.
Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I'll say I have deep gratitude for my mom's. Like, I feel my mom's love in that conversation, and she's really similar to me, where she has often hidden this part of her, this side of her, this exploratory, what else is there side. And so I think even if it was sort of an implicit, the water we swam in, which is why I don't have any specific moments, but I have to, give a lot to her for having the courage to say stuff like that to me and to open her heart, so that we could connect, and I could say, oh, it's cool for me to explore this new thing.
Yeah, lovely. And so you saw leadership. Yeah, what a thing to see. Like, you saw the flaws in it, and you saw that idea that people spend all their life in work, and how painful that is for so many people, and how, I guess, it doesn't have to be that way. That's some part of that story, isn't it? And it comes across in like I said to you before we switched on, I haven't read all of the book, but it really comes across in some of the parts that I have, this sense of vision. Like I guess I catch it in myself sometimes, and people are like, why did you, and I remember being asked, like, why did you end up doing coaching? And for me, I just had this like idealism in there somewhere, that it didn't have to be like that, right? Like, it didn't have to be like, even in some of my pre-coaching work, it was quite good. It was better than some, like, I was working on stuff that I liked. It was just also draining me and stressing me and all those things. And couldn't it be different? And it sounds like you had some of your version of that. But I love this bit. You kind of said it into, so it's like, and then I started getting speaking gigs talking about this. So like, what, you're going to fill in that detail. Like, what was that? How did that happen? And wait, and in both in the book, and I think in the TEDx talk, you talk about not talking about meditation. Maybe this is a slightly different thing. Talking about meditation, but not meditating, something like that.
So the story is, like, I knew I was going to start a business, right? This at some point in my early 20s, like, look, this is happening. I think because I was fed up working for other people, because like you, I had this idealism, was like, so I'll back up even more. I started my career at Michigan's business school, the Ross School of Business, where a guy named Dave Ulrich, who has been voted the #1 HR thinker in the world, was on faculty. And so he was producing all this research saying, like, this is the stuff we need to have positive cultures. And so I was like, I was immersed in that. That was what I was selling. I was on the marketing team. And then I would, go to workplaces, hear friends talk, just sometimes see in our own workplace, like, none of that was being implemented. And I like couldn't understand it. It was like my brain could not understand. We have all of this data, all of this proof that if we do this thing, life will get better, but we're not doing it. Like I could not understand it. And so as I left to other jobs after that and saw, worse and worse cultures and other things, it was like, and I was like, enough, like, someone has to make this thing happen. And in December of 2014, I read a report that talked about drop-in meditation in New York City, and an organization where they would invite like high potential leaders, folks in tech and on Wall Street, to come and do meditation. And they talked about the benefits that created for them in their lives. And I was like, the stuff that they say that meditation creates is the same organizational sort of characteristics that all these leadership speakers are talking about. Like I saw a very clear path. And I had never meditated before. I was interested in Buddhist Buddhism. I showed you earlier Donatello, who is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle.
Yeah.
When I was young, I idolized them. I loved them, and they meditated.
Did they meditate? God, I didn't remember that.
So in the,
now
in the
suddenly
original,
I can kind of see them I can see them like doing it now that you've said that. Sorry, for people who are listening, if you're watching on YouTube, you've just seen Donatello. It's like what is like a 4-inch tall plastic action figure. Yes. I think when I was about 5, my mum has this she has this great, like, slightly painful story to tell. Her and her friends, we didn't have that much money. There were these kind of slightly knockoff turtle figures that you get, and they got them, and then they all fell to bits. So luckily, it wasn't just our family that had the knockoff turtle figures. It was the neighbors as well, something like that. But I think in the end, in the end, I got an actual one which looks like that. But yeah, so they meditated, did they? Go on. You were going to tell the story about this vague memory. Yeah.
In the very first Ninja Turtles movie, Leonardo, who is a leader, is sitting under a tree, cross-legged, like, in lotus, meditating, going, And I thought that you had to do a thing to meditate. I was like, oh, I don't know how to do that. I can't. It's too hard. But like the very like Western American response to meditation. I don't know how to do that. It's too hard. And so I read this report and I was like, that's the answer, man. Like, teach people mindfulness. It's the path. It's the doorway. And so I said, I'm gonna start a company teaching mindfulness in corporations. The kind of fuller story is that was even like a strategy to get what I really wanted, which is to create sort of a third space, a co-working space that is unplugged. And maybe even half of it is super high tech, and then half of it has no technology at all. You can come and have conversations, do art, write in notebooks, meditate, but
I'm imagining that you've got some kind of technology to deaden the data signals so that no one can get on their phones even if they try. That would be cool.
Yeah, like it was like basically like there's a big bowl and you just drop your phone in when you get there. You have your locker or something. But I was like, well, I don't know anything about real estate. I don't know how to open a space. I don't have money. I don't have community. Like, how do I do this? Oh, I can teach mindfulness as lunch and learns in corporations. They'll see that I'm legit. Corporations have money and people will start to respect me and follow me. And then once I have that, I'll have capital to build this space. And so 2 weeks later, I went to Shambhala meditation drop-in in Nashville, where I lived. A month after that, I went to a 2-day or 3-day Shambhala sort of level 1 training or retreat. And I just dove in and I said, I'm going to do this thing. And at my retreat, I met an amazing mentor, Kashanti Maria, who she literally, the first day of the retreat, it started like 8 a.m. And I, especially then, like not very much of a morning person, and especially like I'm quite permeable in the morning to other people's energy. And so it takes me a bit. So I got there and they had like a table set up with some food on it. I was behind the table in the corner eating food, trying to stay, like unconsciously trying to stay away from people. I didn't really have awareness of like that was happening. I just knew like I was tired. I don't want to talk yet. And she walked up and she was like, you're big. You need to not be hiding behind the table. What are you doing here? And I was like, who is this?
Yeah.
And she's like, what are you doing here? I was like, well, funny enough, I have this crazy idea. I'm going to teach mindfulness in corporations, but I don't know how to meditate. So I'm here to learn. And she was like, cool, we're supposed to meet. My name is Maria. I'm a therapist and I teach meditation, and I had a 20-year or something career in international business, and I have an MBA. Let's talk. And that like catapulted. We designed my programs together. Suddenly I felt like I could do it because I didn't feel like a fraud. And so we set up an arrangement where she would lead folks in meditation and I would talk about the science behind it. Because again, I was speaking in corporations. I was in the Bible Belt to introduce this idea of mindfulness in 2014, 2015, which is ubiquitous today. Like it's pretty much everywhere when we think about mindfulness, but back then it was not that commonplace. So we set up an arrangement where she would do that, and I would speak on the benefits of mindfulness and enroll people in how that could help their organizations. And this was March of 2015. In June of 2015, I had started to tell folks about it. I had a friend who was running some workshop. She asked if we could lead a session. I had another friend who went to college with, who ran an organization of students at UNC Chapel Hill here in North Carolina. She said, will you do a weekend workshop on mindfulness for us? and that was a start. And so when I say that I got opportunities, what really happened was I was really scared to market myself. So I would tell friends, and then some of the friends said, "Hey, will you come and do this?" Because I was terrified to cold call.
Yeah.
And so it really came from me just having conversations with friends.
Which I don't know if this is common for you, but with Rich and Toku and those other people hovering over you, like now that's if a coach comes to me and says, "How do you grow your business?" I'd say, well, one thing to do is like talk about what you're doing to your friends until they start telling people about it. And it's like actually a very effective, and you can hear it in that story, right? Let's catch it. Like it's effective. This is not to put off any coaches hearing this, but like I imagine that it was effective for you to do that because those friends, the ones that did connect you to something or asked you to do something, they got how congruent it was with you, and they felt like that it was for real in some way. Because we've probably all had conversations with people who tell us about a thing, and underneath we're like, even if we're being super polite and saying, "Oh, sounds great," underneath there's a part of me going, yeah, you're not the person that I'm going to recommend if my sister needs that thing you're talking about, right? Whereas
That's so true.
They didn't feel that with you.
I'm personally on the extreme side of skeptical with friends who are starting a new thing. Like I trust you as a human, and I want to see that the thing you're doing is going to last, is going to stick. And so what that means is, as a service provider, I am intensely focused on making sure I establish trust. And some of these folks, these friends who so the first kind of big conference speaking gig I got, this is where I my first coaching client came from. It was a former marketing client. And so what I started to see was I had spent years establishing trust, even if it was in a different industry. And so I am like all in on do great work and establish trust, and good things will happen. And I'm just starting to learn over the last 2, 3, 4 years. Also, like, ask for help. Like
do some marketing as well.
Yeah, right. Like do that thing, and yeah, like trust that you're legit, right? Like I'm far on the other side of the spectrum very often.
Yeah. Oh, I just want to catch it. You said a really beautiful thing in there, which I think is really quite hard to hold sometimes for people when they're shifting careers of any kind, perhaps particularly into coaching, which is you had years of established trusted relationships from whatever you were doing before. And those people, I caught myself saying this to client once, it's like, if like the shift makes sense when you're doing that because it makes sense to you. So it's going to make sense on some level to anybody who's really seen you before. Mm-hmm. So if you've got those trusted relationships, just because you go back and go, I'm doing this slightly weird thing now about mindfulness that looks like it's nothing to do with marketing, they're going to be like, that makes total sense, Matt, because even subconsciously underneath somewhere, they won't say this, but it might be true. I felt that kooky woo-woo side of you the whole time.
Yeah.
And it's why I liked you. Right. And it's why we had that connection. And it's really what these people here need. So come and speak at this conference.
Yeah, it's almost, as we talk about hiding that part of us, it's like, I trust you more now that you've told me about this. Yeah, interesting. Which is really, it's a wonderful thing to receive, and to be able to offer to other people, to say like, oh yeah, I didn't know, I couldn't have spoken that, but now that you say it makes complete sense. Like, hell yes, let's go. I got you.
Yeah. And I want to get into coaching because it's kind of a cool, obviously it's kind of what this show is about, but there's just something like very matter of fact or direct about the way you talk about a whole set of things in that story. So I knew I was going to start a business. I did this thing with Maria. We got these things. There's probably a question here. I guess it's something like, was that's what it sounds like in the retelling? Was that what it felt like at the time? Like, what did it feel like through that process?
Yeah, generally I feel fear, I feel afraid often. And when I tell these stories, I don't include it that much because it's sort of like, it's a presupposition for me in many ways.
I'm always afraid. So like, why would I mention
that's basically, it? Yeah. And what when I'm clear on a thing, nothing stops me. Like so it's kind of like holding a lot of things at once. So I was very clear that mindfulness was the next step. I was very clear that I was going to do this work to impact organizations and leaders. I was very clear that that was new and I was scared. And, speaking of it, I was also had massive imposter syndrome. It was sort of like, I just kind of guessed that was what came along with it. If I can say that. And in many ways, I think it held me back from having more clients earlier, because again, I was afraid to sort of market or kind of own and claim that. And yeah, I tell it matter of factly because that's often how life occurs to me. I mean, this is fast forwarding a bit, but I wrote This Is Coaching because last year in February, at the end of February into early March, I went to Hawaii with my now fiance. That's where we got engaged. We had this beautiful 10-day trip as a part of like me recovering from the year before. And we woke up, we had a very early flight. I had woke up at like 3:30 or 4 in the morning. And again, I'm not a morning person. I wake up with the sun. So it's dark and the book was channeled through me. Like there was a voice that said, "You're writing a book." And I was like, cool. When it was like this year. And I was like, I don't know if that's possible. And the outline was in front of my face. We got to the airport and I wrote 80% of the outline on the plane. I say this matter of fact because that's how it happened. I had feelings, but then I got home and I just carved out an hour every day and I wrote. When life moves through me in that way, it just does. And the downside of that, and I love that you're pointing to this, that I can often forget, is that it's a big deal that I wrote a book. But because I said yes, and that yes, and then what happened after that felt quite effortless, I can discount that. Now, the publishing process of the book, I can talk about how that was hell. Like that caught me off guard, and that, and so there's things that I can speak to matter of factly because they don't occur to me as that challenging. It was sort of like, yeah, I just kind of like walked through the things, but then there are other parts that just were like extremely challenging. And sometimes the things that are hard for other people are not hard for me, and vice versa.
I know I find that quite hard. I want everybody to struggle with exactly what I struggle with, because then I'll feel more normal. Unfortunately,
well, sometimes I can disconnect because, by the way, I have a strategy, that an unconscious strategy often, of having a lot of things look really easy from the outside. Again, like I got love from being the valedictorian, and so I learned to make it look effortless. And so what that can create is a disconnect where people are like, either one, Matt doesn't have any problems, and Matt's doing amazing things. Meanwhile, over here, I'm like, they're not amazing, I'm just doing them. Like, I feel like a fraud all the time. Or two, I can forget that things are harder for other people than not hard for me. And I'm like, why aren't you just doing the thing? Like, come on, just do it. Like, I can lose empathy in those moments too.
Yeah, so much in that matter we could kind of go into, but let's definitely talk a little bit about the pain of the publishing process. And like, let's slow it down, because there was a really like beautiful thing in there. Like, don't forget that it's a big deal that you wrote this book. And I read some of the reviews on Amazon, and they're beautiful, apart from that one really, really funny 1-star one, which I'm really glad you sounded like you took your 1-star review. I saw it on your Instagram as like a picture near the top. But next, by the way, everybody, next to a quote from Marshall Goldsmith about Marshall Goldsmith, is that right, about the book? So it's like you were like making yourself like, no one's in any doubt that it's a good book, right? At that point, when you got Marshall Goldsmith and Anon from Amazon giving you a 1-star and writing, I wrote it down somewhere. What was the thing? Nothing original.
Nothing original.
That's the whole review, I think.
In the title of the title, this is hilarious. Like, all of this is so, I literally laughed out loud.
Yeah, but just to catch that, I'm really like, that's an amazing thing also, that you literally laughed out loud, because I remember, in fact, no, that's not true. So I got a first, I got a first 1-star rating for one of my books, and I felt very neutral about it. It didn't bother me at all. It was actually when I got a 3-star review with something written in it that I was like, I mean, everything in it was interesting because I was able to slow down and go, yeah, pretty much everything she said here is it's actually true about my book. It's just that I think that's part of why the book is good, and she thinks it's why it's mediocre. But that was a lot harder for me to absorb, actually. So to have the 1-star review with some text there, someone who's thought enough to write it, that's like, well done for holding like that lightly enough.
Well, I got a second 1-star a couple of weeks after that. Really, that like knocked me sideways a bit. That like that got more. This one was super hilarious because the title said average. It gave me 1 star and then said nothing original. So like all of it, I was like, there's like that's like can we just have a conversation? Can I understand? Like, just tell me more about your mind, because none of those things actually add up for me. But I got,
because like you said in the
1-star.
Instagram post, there are some excellent doodles in there, which are for sure original because you did them.
Right. Yeah. So I was like that. I know that that's actually not true. So
it's a good one when, you know, I think that's a really good technique when the mind is going a bit nuts on something like a 1-star review. It's like, factually check it, fact check. It's like, this is not 100% true because I have some drawings which are literally original to this book. So even if, as you say, one parts of it, I feel like I'm channeling my coaches and teachers sometimes, or speaking their words. The doodles for sure original. So this is not true. So I can some space there. Yeah. Sorry, in terms of the second one,
yeah, it got me a bit, and I don't recall the exact wording. I read it once, and I think I was like, okay, I need to put that away.
Maybe it was that one actually that I noticed, and I thought, yeah, this one would have got me. Maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, it was saying that, like, you know, this is not actually quite useful for coaches. It's quite flowery language, and yeah, I mean, what I take from that is like, I don't think you actually read the whole book. And so it's sort of like, oh, like, read the book. Like, if you're going to give me a 1-star, like, oh, read the book. And 2, I'm sorry that I missed you. Because I quite intentionally tried to use language that folks would understand. And my intention behind writing the book was to give a framework for coaches that they could land on the ground and apply. Even if I use really high level language as well, I like personally think I did a good job of both. And so to hear like, nope, that like, I'm just going to entirely dismiss the one thing, it was like, oh, okay, maybe I didn't do as good of a job as I thought. And maybe I do stink, but you know,
but then there's like, also look at the other 40 reviews or whatever, which are mostly people saying this is so useful. And I understand why they're saying that as well. So yeah, look, well done. Because it's not nothing to write a book, and to write one about coaching, and to write one that is obviously really useful to a lot of people. You know, from those reviews, I can kind of feel it reading the book as well. So let's hold that. And then go on. Yeah.
Oh, there's a show I love called How I Met Your Mother that ran a few years ago.
Yeah.
And there's a moment where the main character tries to add a +1 to a wedding with like a week before the wedding. And he's like, how is it a big deal? And the bride just laughs and says, plan a wedding. and that, like, that I heard her voice when I get that review, and I'm like, I like laugh. I'm like, write a book.
Yeah.
Like, go like, and like, just go through the process and see what it's like. And then rethink if you would add that same review. Because it has made me a lot more generous when people put art into the world by a long shot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think by the time I got to my books, I'm quite glad that they came after so much work and thinking about creating things for me, because I had by that point managed. I mean, the first book particularly took a lot, but the second one, the other ones less. But I'd managed to internalize some of those messages that we hear, like, you know, the Teddy Roosevelt speech that Brene Brown loves about, like, listen to the man in the arena, not the critic, right? And it is a really different thing. Like, you're right, when you're speaking to someone who's been in the arena of writing a book or publishing it, it does have a different, even if they were to say, which hasn't happened to me thankfully so far, but maybe it will soon, your book is crap. it would come with a different feel to the feel
Yeah.
of a friend of mine who's never put anything of themselves out in the world saying your book is crap.
Yep.
And the other one, of course, is, which I think I got from Litvin a bit, is, but also from other people, is like, yeah, it's not for everybody, and that is okay. If people don't get it, some people don't get it. That's okay, I think.
That I'm learning increasingly that, and I can tell that to people as a marketer, like you want ones and tens.
Yeah.
Right. You want people to say this is not for me or for me.
But for your heart to hold that is a different thing. Yeah.
And do I have it right? You wrote and published 4 books in a year?
It was about a year. The published, yeah, they were written over 3 years and then published. Then there was like a 2-year gap, and then they were published over 1 year. Yeah. So it wasn't, they were all written in that period of time, which I have to keep reminding people, because the books really are about people getting out of their own way and finally doing the things that they've been wanting to do, like writing a book. And so I'm always really careful with the practical how I did that stuff, so that to make it real, because I want it to be exactly real. And I don't want anyone to think there's no possible way I can write and publish 4 books in a year, because, like Robbie did, therefore I'm not meant to be an author, because I didn't write and publish 4 books in a year. So I'm always like catching those things. But yeah, they did come out in a year, which was kind of relentless, which is partly why now this year, and we were saying a little bit before we switched on, I've got like a load of stuff going on in personal life. But even before that, I was kind of worn out from the process of publishing 4 books. And I also, last year, I set myself a challenge. My marketing for my book was to try and appear on 100 podcasts in 2022. And that plus the books, that was like all my goal energy for like, I don't know how many years. So I'm on a different, looking for a different energy this year, which has been great in some ways. Because if I was trying to set those kind of ambitious goals for this year, I would have been at this stage abandoning them because of loads of stuff that's happening in our lives right now. But yeah, let's come back to publishing the books, and maybe the book a little bit more in a bit. Let's go to this beginnings of this shift, when this first person at I think it was the client from Marketing Days invites you to the conference. Someone looks on your website. I love it that you. So wait, had you? Because before you said, actually, let me. I'm going to rewind another bit. You said that you had this kind of skeptical view of coaching. So when you put it on when did that change? Did that change when you were finally? It was only 2 sessions in. You put it on your website despite thinking it was kind of motivational speakers and hype.
Total classic marketer move.
Love it.
Total classic, right? Like, yeah. Because what I was trying to do was figure out a sustainable business model for what I was doing. Yeah. And I was looking at this saying, like, I think that corporations will pay me. I don't know, it's unproven, but all of the sort of market research I was doing at folks who were also speaking on this, they said coach. And I was like, okay, I'll put coach on my website. Like it was that almost that simple of like, let's at least say it. And then I can put it in my bio. And then maybe one day it'll happen.
I love it. And it's kind of a sign. And then you get asked, and then you do some, and then you felt what could happen. Now, what's interesting is the way you described feeling what it could be like, that there's something to this. You must have been doing it, right? You must have not just been giving motivational speeches and telling people stuff they already knew. So somehow, I mean, partly because you'd Googled how do you do coaching, but like,
how do you do coaching?
Yeah. But like, what do you think? Oh, maybe it's a question like, why did it totally add up that you were coaching, even though you hadn't known that it was even a thing?
The first client, she came up and talked to me after I gave my presentation, and I fell in love with her. I was like, I hope this person calls me again. And it was several months or some number of months before she did. But what I saw was all we were doing was being in a conversation where I was just like loving her. Like it was like one of the most natural things, which is why I was skeptical and questioning, like, am I really coaching? Because I was just showing up as me. and I was doing way more advice giving than I do now as a coach. I was like, right, like I was still finding my way and feeling my way, and had
Well,
not
and
gone
if
through
it
a
came partly
training.
through the mindfulness thing, there probably was some teaching or some training that she was expecting and wanted as part of that, which was probably really valuable.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
and
maybe.
and and really what I saw was like, oh my gosh, like I'm just showing up as me. I'm having this type of conversation. This person trusts me, and I just get to like love and trust them. And
Did you have that language of love? That's what it felt like at that time, or is that something
probably
you've seen
not.
later?
Probably
Yeah.
not. Yeah. So with the way I describe my coaching now is 100% love and 100% challenge.
Hmm.
So how do we hold both of those at exactly 100% all the time? But yeah, I didn't have that then.
Yeah.
Now I can look back and so immediately, like we and I dropped into a space that was not advice giving, was not sagely, me telling my stories. It was not hype man. It was none of those, and it worked. And so that's, I think, why it didn't take very long for me to rethink it.
Yeah. And so then what happened with coaching?
And so at that point, I had quit my full-time marketing job. I was doing freelance marketing. I had moved across the country from Nashville to Connecticut. And the intention was still to grow the mindfulness business. So my first client, I think I charged $250 a session, or maybe less, maybe $500 a month for 4 calls. I think that was what it was, $500 a month for 4 calls. And I had another friend who said, "Hey, will you coach him for a little bit? I can pay you $20 a session." And I was like, "Yeah, cool, let's do that." And they were my first 2 coaching clients for a year and a half. And I was getting some opportunities to do mindfulness stuff. And I was mostly doing marketing consulting work. And this led us to maybe I had another coaching client by 2018, but that led me to say in like January of 2018, I need to get a training, because like I'm more and more focused on this coaching thing. I'm less and less interested in speaking or running workshops. And also
And why do you
I'm
think that
asking
was?
people,
Why do you think
part
that?
of it,
Yeah, what was
yeah,
that?
part of it is that I realized kind of twofold. One, mindfulness became more of an en vogue thing. And so yoga teachers were taking $50 an hour to run these workshops. And I was asking for $100 to $300 an hour to run the workshops. And so it was a matter of like, how do I didn't know how to justify it, because I was still brand new in the process. It was like, yeah, I feel like a fraud all the time. I don't know why you should pay me. And also, if you only value it at $50, then this is probably not a conversation. Um, so that was part of it. And then part of it is the way that I'm thinking about it. So I created this framework for mindful leadership that became my TEDx talk. And that's kind of the high level what of what I think is successful leadership. And I realized now, looking back, what I couldn't articulate, but I can articulate now, is I still have this bias that just speaking about it in workshops and not really getting into it, getting in the deep practice of taking a look at ourselves so we can develop self-awareness, taking a look at our relational patterns so that we can develop awareness of others, having accountability so we can focus on what's important, like being in these deep conversations about it was not going to produce the what. So the how became coaching. It was like, do the stuff that gets us to the what. And so I immediately went like, oh, cool, let's go deep. And so in many ways, unfortunately, I abandoned the speaking maybe too early, in favor of coaching. But I found myself that I was more and more drawn to these coaching conversations and what coaching was and how it all worked.
Yeah. And so there's some then, I need something more, you were saying, a training, something like that.
Yeah. So I was like, well, I don't even know if I'm coaching.
Yeah.
And I'm doing this entirely in a bubble. And so I lived in Connecticut. I looked at an ICF certified in-person training. And at that point, I was still in Rich Lippman's community, still at a Facebook group. And I saw Toku post about the Samurai Coaching Dojo. And honestly, he completely tricked me. I told him this later. I signed up for something. He sent an email that said, "Hey, I'm opening spots just to talk to people. If you want to grab 20 minutes with me, let's talk." And what he did was send me in the coaching dojo sales funnel. So I so I signed up just to get a conversation with this guy who seemed like he was doing cool work. And in 20, 30 minutes with Toku, it became abundantly clear that that's what I was looking for, was the dojo. Yeah. And specifically what that was working with people who were not all beginners. So I looked at the curriculum of the training, and half of the curriculum was psychology stuff that I had learned and embodied. And I was like, well, I don't want to waste half of my time like rehashing this stuff. And I, again, had a little bit of judgment on people who would go through a training but not make it their vocation, not be super committed. And again, like when I'm clear on something, I'm clear. I was like, look, this is what I'm doing. I only want to be with people who are going to make this work. And Toku, and we talked about the dojo, and what I realized was I would be one of the youngest and earliest coaches in the cohort. A lot of these folks had been coaching for years. I would be in the same room with them. And the type of learning was not book learning, was not lecture. It was in the moment practice with feedback. And I said, I want to be the dumbest person in the room, which is sometimes challenging for me to do. And I imagine it would be really challenging in an early level coaching. So let's go do this dojo thing. And it profoundly changed who I am as a coach, what I believed about coaching, what I saw available as coaching. And I found belonging for one of the first times in my life with this side of me that we talked about that I was afraid to let out had full reign and permission to be let out. And I went, oh my gosh, this feels so good.
Yeah, beautiful. I can't remember if Toku and I talked about this. I can't remember if we talked about it, and I can't remember if like what I've learned about the dojo over the years as someone who hasn't been a member. So tell me, like, the practice, that's one thing I hear there. The people, but what else? Or maybe it's just those things. I mean, there's quite big things that you just said about belonging. But what, as you look back, particularly perhaps on that early experience with it, what stands out for you? What were they doing there that made it so powerful for you?
Yeah, I'll expand on the others, but first I want to talk about kind of the nature of the curriculum and teaching. So Toku is a philosophy major, and like Toku is questions, right? Like that's like and the curriculum essentially every week posed a question or a phenomenon in coaching without giving an answer. So in week 1, the topic was mental models. And all the topic said, it was like defined mental models, which is basically how the structures and systems and definitions we use to create our world or define our world. And then it said, your client has mental models and you have mental models. And then together you both have mental models about coaching. All of that is happening. Go play. And that was exactly what I needed. Cause I didn't want a curriculum of like, here's the ... like way to do this, or here's all the stuff that's happening. I was like, I know all the stuff that's happening. Like, what I wanted was like a playground to land in, and then new stuff to pay attention to that I realized, and I just embodied pretty quickly, I think, that this stuff never ends. Like I could for the rest of my life as a coach enter into a coaching conversation simply from the frame of what are the mental models that are occurring between me and my client, and I will never get all the answers. And that is deeply appealing to me. And I think Toku, like I was like the perfect student for Toku in that sense, which is like, cool, like we can eat all of it up and it's never enough. And that was how the whole dojo worked, where they're basically like, we're going to send you out and not give you an answer and you get to practice. And so that was part 1. Part 2 is that I was in my small group was a guy who was used to be in marketing and also software, like a business coach. I was in with a former rabbi, Ted Ryder, who I mentioned in my acknowledgments. I was in with someone who had worked in like consulting, like big business stuff. I was like, what I got to see was that any presupposition I had about what coaching was supposed to be was blown out the window. And every time I saw one of them coach, I learned something new about how coaching could look. And what it really allowed for me was like, I could own myself as a coach. Really powerfully, thanks to that.
And then at some point, is this right? You became part of you led some dojos.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
So I was a student in the dojo in the spring of 2018. And in the spring of 2019, and I was still just like hanging out. They had some like post dojo membership stuff. I was in that forever. And was Aaron Caulfield and I ran a men's group together that year. Kevin Lawrence and I, who was my sparring partner, I was still in and around the community wholeheartedly for a while. In the spring of 2019, they asked me to be a senpai, which is a sensei or a teacher in training in the dojo. And that was its own fundamentally different experience, which was really high flame leadership training. So less on my coaching and more on how I was showing up in developing the program. I really hated it and I really loved it. I mean, it was super challenging. And I don't know if you know Adam Quiney and Bay LeBlanc Quiney.
Yeah, I've met them both again from that time in Rich's community. They were around, yeah.
So they were also supporting me in leadership there, and Adam is the like biggest pain in the ass I've ever met when he's in support of your leadership, because he is such an unyielding stand for anyone he's supporting to be their fullest self. And I'm not joking. For a year straight, anytime I saw Adam on a call, my body was emotionally triggered. I would get sweaty. I would feel nervous. I would have to go pee. Like all of the stuff physiologically happened every time I saw Adam, even if he wasn't focused on me for a year. I'm really grateful for it, and I hated it so hard. So I did a year of senpai training, and then after that, and so 2020 and 2021, Christina and Toku decided to go their separate ways, as you know, in running the business. And since I had done all that training and Toku and I became close, he asked me if I wanted to co-lead it with him. And so for 2 years, I was co-sensei, the last 2 years of the dojo.
Yeah, so I think that actually was exactly when Toku and I spoke on this show. So I was just remembering that as a game, just as they were deciding to go their separate ways, and probably, like, for all I know, we go back and it'll be like the picture. He'll be like, "I'm just going to get my friend Matt to co-lead it with me." I don't think he did say that in the conversation, but that reminds me, because that's exactly when we were speaking, right? And then there's this. So I imagine throughout that time, there's this thing happening with your coaching, doing those three things, right? Like learner. What's the word for the kind of trainer in training? Senpai. So like learner, senpai, and then co-leading. Like each of those will have been upgrading the ways of being that you had with the people you were coaching, if you were coaching. But like you said, there wasn't much of a coaching business at the start of that. Like you were playing with it. So what happened with the people you were working with, and how did that shift over those 3 or 4 years?
I started to again, like, own more of myself as a coach. I still didn't have, it took me until 2020 to fully kind of like replace my marketing income with coaching income. And so 2018, 2019 up, into 2020, I was increasing my client load. What started to happen with my clients was, if I worked together with someone, say, for a year, and it took 10 months to figure out what we were actually working on, that started to get closer and closer. And these days it's like 3 weeks, right? Mm. Like if people are going to quit with like go and break down and quit, it's like in the first month and a half. And back then it was like, like 9-10 months in. It was, so what I'm finding is that we have the ability, to discover what we're really working on with my clients earlier, thanks to a lot of this. Like we can get into that stuff quicker
and make that real in some way for people who are listening, who, and I think I include myself in this. I can kind of guess at what you mean by that, but what do you mean by finding out what we're working on? Like, how does that look?
So as a coach, what I am constantly interested in, I'm looking at a couple of questions. One, what is currently impossible for my client? What do they think they can never do? And so often what that looks like is that's a thing that's too scary for them to even ask for. And so it might be like, I want, I worked with a startup founder once, and one would think that working with a startup founder, having the coaching partially paid for by their investors, we would work on business. We started working on romantic relationships, because it was like, what feels impossible? Like, oh, having like a deeply committed, romantic, intimate relationship. And it became clear to both of us when we saw that, that would shift everything in their life. And so what I'm like, that was the kind of the crux, right? Like, if we looked at relational stuff, that would shift everything. And it would be the stickiest, scariest, most fear-inducing part to look at, right? The part that is kind of like, I don't want to look at that. I can't transform it. It's never changing. And I'd say when I was a younger coach, we would have danced around business stuff for a long time, and I would have been afraid to actually point to, like, I think this is what's actually happening. So that is that a helpful example?
Yeah, great. So it's like seeing that key core thing, the ability to see it, and then the courage to risk naming it, right?
Yeah, because this might not work and they might go away.
Yeah. And how did those people, that startup founder or otherwise, where were they coming from as you shifted into coaching and as the coaching practice? You said you gradually got it to the place where it could replace the marketing income.
Yeah.
Like, where were these people coming from as that happened? How were you? We talked about how you developed your practice. How are you developing your coaching business, I guess, or the pool of clients?
I started getting some clients from the dojo, just being in and around the community, even before I was a teacher. Just showing up, and just being there. So the dojo has been a great source of clients. I was doing I would show up to in-person events after I moved back to Michigan, or when I was in Connecticut. So I go to entrepreneur events, I go to networking events, I just talk to people. I went to a college reunion, and I have a now 3+ year client who went to my college, which is really fun. And I started a men's group, and then Aaron Caulfield came on and co-led it with me. And that was just a lot of hustling. It was like, who do you know, who might know who you know, like that. Cause we set pretty ambitious enrollment goals that I think never hit, but it got us into a lot of movement. And then, starting in 2019, I was connected with Pylea, and Pylea is a coaching organization that was created, spun out of a Silicon Valley based venture capital firm. So they mostly invest in very early stage companies. And they have the thesis that if we invest in founder mental health and well-being first, we'll actually produce better returns. And so that's very much in alignment with my idea of, this, like, how do we run organizations effectively and have it not just be primarily profit focused. And the way that I got connected with them is I was in person at a coffee meeting with an investor in Detroit, and he was like, "Why did you want to meet with me?" And before I knew it, I said, because I want every founder in the world to have a coach. And then, like, inside, this is similar to the book, inside was like, holy crap, I guess I'm doing that now. Let's go figure out how to do that. And that's often what I do. I speak absurd things into the world and then try to, like, catch up. It's like my feet go out in front of me, and then I'm trying, like, my body's trying to catch up. And so once I got connected with Pylea, they were the source of some clients. And so they're sort of a client matchmaking service for coaches who are in the network.
Yeah. And there's a load of places things I wanted to ask you about that we've just kind of touched on, work out where to go. But the first one is maybe those, because that's one of the three kind of seemingly impossible goals that are at the start of the book. And I was wondering where they came from, and there's where one of them came from. I wonder if you could speak a little to the other two, and did they arrive in the same way? Like for you, where do these, were they, do you think, things that you were afraid to kind of, that you weren't allowed to, that were impossible to you, and then somehow it sounds like that one you just let out. Is that where they came from for you?
The others I sort of backed into. So even that one has an earlier seed in that. So as I said, my friend Carmen invited me to run a workshop in the early mindfulness days for students. And so when I was developing the workshop, I thought, I don't want to just go teach mindfulness, because like, if we can't apply it to anything, why does it matter? And so I thought, these are really incredible students. They're the top 1% of 1% of students. They're really amazing. They're going to be the CEOs in 10, 20, 30 years. And so therefore, what skills, tools, and abilities that they need to develop so that they can be the CEO that I want them to be selfishly in 10, 20, 30 years to help the world? Oh, that's how I developed the mindful leadership framework. Was kind of like looking out at the future of like, technology is not going to slow down. Our world is changing super fast, probably going to change faster. How can they be successful? So I developed self-awareness, awareness of others, the ability to focus on what's important. Very fundamental internal games. And as I then started to extrapolate that over the next couple of years, I realized, oh my gosh, startup founders, when they have 1, 10, 20, 100 employees, if we can support them in creating successful organizations as cultures that I want, it's way higher leverage than trying to turn a company that has 100,000 employees, 10,000 employees. And so that's how I backed into this. Well, let's just get a coach for every founder. Like, let's just, let's like back into the highest leverage point. And so that was how that emerged, kind of like unfolded. Is that, again, as I was speaking to more people and kind of, I generally have a high level systems view of the world and culture. Like I sit around and think about stuff like that. So that's how that one came. The other mission, number 2, is for every coach in the world to be world class. When I was speaking that first impossible goal in a men's group, one of the guys, Robert Glover, who I love, he wrote No More Mr. Nice Guy. Really incredible dude. He looked at me, he goes, well, what does it matter if every coach sucks? And I was like, yeah, you're right, Robert. Got it. And then I also looked, and I was already still supporting coaches. I was already still teaching in the dojo, and I went, oh, I'm already doing that. I'm already trying to make sure that every coach who at least comes through my door, who I interact with, understands what coaching is, understands the responsibilities of coaching, and is willing to commit to this thing in the way that I am, which is, this is an infinite game and we're always going deeper. And so I just decided to name it. Like, cool, I'm up to that. And then my third impossible goal is for every human in the world to have the skills and being of a coach. And I realized that was sort of my life purpose. My higher why, I say, is I'm here to remind us all that we're God. And, like the like developing and cultivating these skills and ways of being is a reminder of that. Like, they're both sort of intertwined in a really fundamental way. And so the last one is simply a reminder for me of, I think, why my soul is here in this life.
Interesting. Like a couple of years ago, and I wonder if it's like echoes of it. I'm not quite going to get it, I don't think, but I did some work on purpose, and what came from me just one day, a little emerging through, was the shared purpose of humanity is to create the kingdom of heaven on earth. These words just came out, and I just got this sense of like, I think that's the same as that higher why that you just said. I think it's like they're kind of one, I studied maths, right? So they, like, one implies the other. They're just equivalent, right? Essentially, on some level. Beautiful. And I love it's interesting. I hadn't got that reading those goals, but when you say them, it is like they are a kind of those 3 impossible goals. They kind of point at each other. It's like, actually, if you take one away, the other 2 don't make sense. And so it's lovely to hear that. And I like the idea of, that systems thinking. I just love to be around people who are able to do that, because you would get to these leverage points. Like, right, I could just, if I just see this thing that I want, and then I look, where's the leverage? And then I end up, oh yeah, founders, that would imagine that, right? Imagine, high leverage there towards all those other, towards the third one for sure, and the higher why. Yeah, really beautiful. And I'm going to do a slight, because Robert Glover was part of that story. It's good, it works. But one of my other things to catch from before was men's work. And Aaron, who I met in fact, Aaron, I told this story when I started the podcast interview with Toku. My first awareness of Toku was Aaron getting coached by Rich in the intensive in London. Aaron came all the way to London for the intensive, and I was like, wow, there's kind of people who were doing that. I was like, this is and then of course 6 months later I was in Santa Monica. I was like, whoa, what is going on here? But there was something about Aaron, had something about, I'm 99% sure it was Aaron, had something about there are some people in the room who I'm really intimidated by. And that was like part of what had come up from the invitation or the question that Richard posed to everybody. And Aaron had put his hand up, and they were doing something, and he was like, Rich said, point to one. And Aaron turned around and pointed and said, Toku. And that was the first time I was aware of Toku, was like Aaron being intimidated by him. But I love that. And in there is, you mentioned men's work a couple of times, and doing that work, it's in your story. I've read about it, maybe in the book somewhere or on a web page. And, you mentioned John Wineland, who was, I did a couple of workshops with at those intensives, and David Data, whose book had a massive impact on me. So I'm curious for you, what came out of men's work for you, and why is it important to you?
The first words were like, it's everything. In a couple of different ways. One, being with, I have a perspective that men are deeply wounded in the world, women too, both and differently. And one of the core woundings of men is, you're not enough, and it's not okay to feel what you feel. And one of the most profoundly healing experiences of my life was for me to express what I was feeling and who I am in a group of men, and to be received with love. And in person, it's increasingly, I am thinking about the physiological nervous system shifts that happen in transformation. Like, if we're energetic beings, our bodies have to change in order for us to transform. And I experience men's work, especially in-person embodiment focused men's work, as one of the most powerful ways to shift, to change my body and allow for me to be more fully expressed and more of myself, by being able to express or share my shadows, the stuff I was most afraid of, my most deeply painful moments. So a very specific example is that my father had suffered from bipolar disorder. He was an alcoholic. He abused drugs, largely to simply cope. He and my mom divorced when I was about 3. He was in and out of my life, but struggling with his own life until I was 12. And I discovered he had lied to me and said he had no longer been drinking, but found out he was drinking again. So I told him I didn't want to see him again. So I separated from my dad, and then he died when I was 16. And the last time I saw him, the first time I saw him in 4 years, and the last time I saw him was in the ICU or in a hospital in a coma. So I had a lot of wounding from that. And I remember being at a workshop with 40 plus men with John in Mount Shasta, being held by other men as I fully expressed all the anguish, anger, fear, sorrow, loss. Like I could not name the feelings. There's so many. And to be witnessed and loved and encouraged. And then as I was just sobbing after, to receive the touch of men and to receive the love. And it still brings emotions now. And in that way, I say it's everything, because I can only receive love now in that way because I was able to go through that painful experience. My body can receive more love. My body can receive more of all kinds of stuff, but life is fundamentally better because I was allowed to let go of that, and I wasn't closed down at all from others.
Why for you is the fact that it was men meaningful in there? I want to catch it partly because I'm curious what your take on that is, and partly because I know I could kind of give some version of my answer to that, but I know also that people find the idea of men's work kind of weird sometimes, and I think partly it's because of that question, like, why does it matter that it's only men there?
I grew up learning that men were dangerous. The only emotions that I saw in men, and this is a very broad brush, but we'll just run with it, was anger and fear, and generally fear coming out as anger. Love was happened and was awkward
and was almost never talked about, right?
Yeah, and like I don't know that I told, like, my dad told me he loved me with his whole heart often, and he was super volatile, and I didn't really believe him because he wasn't in my life, right? And so like I learned to not receive that love. And so what happens is there is a particular energy frequency, which is men, just generally like the masculine energy force in the world. I learned to not trust. So my body, my nervous system took on a shape that says, don't trust that, don't open to it, don't receive anything from it. Look for the other shoe to drop when it's going to become angry, kind of like always test to make sure it's okay. I played sports for 20 years and I was not the biggest athlete. And so I was also like mildly bullied, right? Like I was like, I have all of these sort of archetypal frameworks that say that human in that form, you cannot trust on some level. And I think the only way to rewrite it, or the most effective way to rewrite it, is to have that form rewrite it, right? And so there are men in that group who remind me of guys I played baseball with, who remind me of my dad, who remind me of me, who remind me of my brother. And to receive this new type of energy from them, I think is the way to transform it. It's similar to like, we move through spider phobia by being around spiders and learning that we're okay. We have to go through the thing in order to be able to regulate in it.
Yeah. So this is just something like I haven't done very much men's work, but I did just before COVID, actually, I did a retreat, and you can feel it, can't you? Like you can just feel like the thing that is different when the room is just men, and in that particular way, because it does happen in other places. It happens, like you say, in the changing rooms. It happens on a sports field. It happens in the certain bars or pubs that are showing certain sports at certain times. But it's either almost or completely men. But it's quite a different thing to be, I don't know, explicit purpose and the containers that people can create. It's very, one of my reflections would be, I'm just remembering it really, that like we don't have those healthy men only spaces, really. They probably, maybe they used to exist at certain ways at certain times in certain cultures, but we don't really have them now, unless we're lucky with sports. But mostly people aren't. Most people aren't thinking about that.
Let's make more of them.
Yeah, it sounds like you did with Aaron. That's like powerful, amazing work to have done.
And that was before I did any work with John. There was just sense in me of like, let's create this for Matt. I couldn't name it, but I knew that it was important.
Yeah.
The other aspect that's really important, I think fundamental to like doing the work with John that David Data inspired, which is the fundamental sort of sacred masculine feminine energy work, was it allowed me to feel and to have language to understand the world way more acutely, and has fundamentally shifted my relationship with Kristen, my fiance, and all kinds of folks. And like, there's, to your point, like we can feel when it's only men, or say, not that these words are gendered, masculine energy versus feminine, but we can feel the stillness of having a group of people committed to being in that stillness, that masculine type energy, that is often quite nourishing. And when it's a bit mixed, and I grew up really mostly having relationships with women. I was in baseball. I mean, I played baseball. I was in sports, but my close relationships and often the workplaces I was in were women dominated.
Yeah.
And so, through doing men's work, I had the opportunity to be able to feel the difference in environments. And now that I have that acute awareness of what's happening in an environment on a regular basis, like my whole life is different. I can be more me, and I can receive people more fully.
Yeah. Be more me and receive more fully. Yeah, that resonates with me. And I was just thinking, speaking of 1-star reviews, if you want to see some great 1-star reviews, check out David Data's Amazon page.
Oh, I bet.
People will, some people, if they were to read, so the book that I read, which had, similarly, I would say, transformative effect on my relationship with my wife, to the one you're talking about for you, is The Way of the Superior Man. And if you want to see some fantastic Amazon reviews, definitely check those out. And yeah, it is that idea of men's work. Yeah, is for me like, yeah, it did enable me to be more of myself, because culturally, personally, I don't know, this kind of fear of that masculine energy or aversion to it. Life's quite different when you just allow that to exist. Or for me, it's been quite different to allow that to exist in different ways. It's nice to be kind of reminded really of that. I haven't been in those ideas necessarily consciously for a little while, but as we're talking about it, it's hard to not remember the impact of playing with some of the things that you writes about in that book, and then feeling how different it is. Mm-hmm. For me, one of the ones was like just allowing my kind of masculine energy, decisiveness, to exist, just like practicing with it, in pointless times, but just and then the difference in feeling when I allowed that to happen versus my way of being before that, which had been, classically kind of passive about decision making. Lots of places. I remember my friend Steve being like, "What's happened to you? You've become," like, we were like shopping, him and his then fiance and me. I think we're shopping in a supermarket. He's like, "What's happened to you? You've become decisive." Because I was like practicing it. I was like, "What do you think we should have for dinner?" This. It's like, what is this? But it's like, that's meaningful. So it's interesting to kind of feel this conversation and move it in different ways, and feel free to reject my moving of it, of course, at any moment. But I'm aware, like, there's something about, sounds like, I'm curious about the time as CEO of Pylea, because you kind of talked about it again, because I've been in your space a little bit ahead of this call. I can't remember exactly what you've said in this call and what I've just been in your space getting. Yeah. You said there was somewhere you said there was some healing that had to happen after it. So, you said it in this call, right? You were in Hawaii, and then the book arrived, right? Yeah. So how did you become, I think it was something you wrote to me. You said that you kind of wound up your coaching business, which it sounds like in a really healthy place, to take on that role of CEO at Pylea, and then were in it for about a year, and then came out, and we're still in the kind of rebuilding after that, and the book is here and that kind of thing. But so how did that come about? And what was meaningful?
I was introduced to Pylea in late 2019, and then in 2020, was just increasingly active in sort of strategic communication, strategic talk. And at that point, it was just the co-founder, Kari Solins, who's amazing, super grateful to, like be able to do business with her. And her sister, Lisa, were basically the two employees. And then there's a series of coach contractors. And it was at the point where by the end of 2020, where it was like, we're growing, we need some more folks on the team. At that point, Kari was hesitant to take on the CEO role. She was a bit hesitant, I think, to stand out. She likes to kind of work in the background. And I said, well, you and I are talking about this stuff. Like, I'm not hesitant. Would it fit? And they said yes. And so suddenly I was going to be CEO of this company, and imagined it to be a 10-year sort of journey in service of all of the impossible goals that I list, right? So very clear, we're working with founders, like check, easy check. Two, in Pylea, we're deeply committed to supporting coaches in their own growth and development when they're part of the network. So cool, I get to build that from the ground up. Check two. And then, that's like the third is kind of a natural occurrence. And we grew like crazy. We almost tripled in the year of 2021 when I was CEO. We grew the team. I was number 3 to like 5 or 6 by the time I left. And it was insane. It was insane. I don't know if like anyone who's listening who has gone through 2 to 3x growth in an enterprise company over a year, like it's a lot. And we were making systems up as we went. We were doing all kinds of experiments. We had no idea what was going to work and it wasn't. We had really amazing months. We had really terrifying months. Just like all of the things happened. And also, Kristen, my fiance, was working weekends at the time. And so the only time I would have any opportunity to see her was during the week. And so I would take Thursdays off. And that was basically my only day off for a year. So we were just, there's so much to do. And by the end of the year, I was, Bay, who was my coach at the time, called me a nubbin of Matt, just like had worn myself down. And it's really fascinating kind of place for me to look as I think about like systems and culture and environment, is that we as an organization are really they still are, and I am as a human, committed to these values of growing sustainably. Literally the company's tagline is build without burnout. And we're a startup in the startup world. So like we're already swimming in water that says kill yourself in pursuit of growth. And so it's like this like really interesting tension about like, how do we do the thing we know is important while also continuing to, while pushing the way we need to kind of be on the forefront of growing a business. And sometimes we were successful, but by the end I was cashed. And so I think I had one coaching client throughout the year. I turned down other folks and wound down any other coaching engagements. I led the dojo that year. That was in March and April. But after that was one of the reasons we decided to wind it down, was I, again, expected I was going to be full-time in Pylea. And sort of by the end of the year, it became clear that, Kari needed to be CEO. To be super frank, she's CEO now, right? It was like, hey, we're two visionaries who are just like bumping heads on a regular basis, and we love each other and respect each other, and it's her thing, man. And I didn't want to keep running into a person who I love and respect so much, and so I made the really challenging decision to step away. And last year kind of figure out like, what does this mean for me in my business, and how do I fit in Pylea still, and how do I fit in my relationship, and what is life anyways. And then a book came, and I wrote a book, and I had, so like, I look back and I'm like, I don't know how this stuff is happening, but it's happening, and I'm just doing my best.
Yeah. And so just to zoom in on something that I'm just curious about, it's like, it's going to change the energy a little bit. So maybe, yeah, it does. No, it does continue. It's like, what did you, when you came out, the book came, and then I think I understand from what you sent to me and the kind of questions that I sent ahead of the call is you are building up the coaching business again. Like, what did you just like? How, knowing everything you knew, because it's an interesting thing to do, right? To go to build a coaching business. So, like, how, like, on a kind of back of envelope, I think you sent this to me, so I could kind of probably got it written down. But what did your coaching practice, the coaching practice you wound up, look like?
Yeah.
Like roughly how many clients, what kind of, mix of there's the dojo was there, maybe the men's group,
Yeah.
there's like a few different things in there. What did that look like?
Yeah, it was the dojo or the men's group, we sunsetted after 2019. So in 2020, I probably did 90 to $100,000 in revenue, up to 8 clients at a time. I would have loved to have more clients, but that's where I was. And I've always had it served a mix of coaches and then founders, leaders, etc. sort of folks. So I went into 2020. I mean, like looking at 2021, I was like, cool, my coaching business is going to grow. We're going to do the dojo again. We're going to grow that. It's going to be great. Then see if there's more stuff. I'm going to probably lead some groups. Like 2021 is like, even without Piley, it was like, this is going to be by far the best year of my coaching business. And then I, took on what I planned to be a 10-year adventure. And I exited that with like, oh, first of all, I can handle so much more stress in my coaching conversations. I was having conversations with people and feeling like, oh, this thing right here that they're feeling or that we're talking about would have like, I would have been really insecure, kind of like not knowing what to do. And now I'm just kind of like watching myself be entirely okay. So that was fun.
Yeah.
That was fun. I up leveled, and the side effect of that was that I had folks quit on me in 2021, last year, 2022. Earlier, I didn't ever have I never had a coaching client quit until I think 2021, early 2021. And so last year, there were like 3 or 4 folks who quit. And I was like, what the heck is happening? Like, who am I being as a coach? What's going on? And part of it that I saw is I had shifted who I was as a coach, and I was still enrolling folks who were folks I'd worked with before. And so I was inviting them to play a different game, but not explicitly. And so I had to start to make a decision of like, if I want to work with these folks, then I have to play different as a coach, or I can start to look at different folks who are more willing to be, in deeper spiritual conversations, in like my ability to hold them in intense pressure that would have been challenging for me before, but I'm going to confront them more, basically, is how it is. So am I courageous enough to enroll those types of people who are now scary for me to enroll, right? Because it was a little bit playing safe. So I got to be confronted with that last year, and last year I made a third of the income that I made in 2021, and in many ways thought I was going to have an even better year than I had the year before. But like, it was sort of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or sometimes 3 steps back. It was, at least revenue wise.
Yeah. And just like on a like really curious practical term, how do you contractually, financially handle, you personally, because I know how I do this these days, but like when somebody wants to stop, like what happens what are the agreements you have about that?
Yeah. Generally folks pay month to month. They pay at the beginning of the month. I don't have a fancy legal agreement. It's an agreement that like has clear agreements about this is what we're up to. And it doesn't say any, I mean, it says like you're agreeing to this amount of time together. If someone wants to quit, I will invite them to conversations to really look at their commitment, to look at how, the impact of it. And if they want to quit, I don't offer any legal recourse. There's like nothing. It's like, cool, got it. Let's talk again. And so, I'm less likely to say yes to you in the future. Like, just like, I'm very clear. I'm like, look, this is the impact.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. Yeah, that's strong, isn't it? Well, I guess if that's true, then you say
If
that,
it's true,
presumably.
if it's true,
Because like
right.
so I just caught, I was like, there's a client flashed before my eyes that I wish I'd said that to the first time, because it would have made, because actually I had a client who quit on me twice in separate engagements, and it meant that like I know inside that yeah, okay, thank you, Matt's nodding and saying same. um
Yeah.
because like I wish, like after the second one, I managed to say it to them, in some way, as I worked it out. Really, I don't think I knew it, because on some level I thought this person was really amazing, absolutely had that feeling of that you talked about with the first client, of being kind of in love of like this really wonderful person. They were kind of perfect client, and yet, we have to have those, well, my view would be, you've got to have those boundaries that are solid and grounded and centered, so that actually it's not okay to keep saying to somebody, I'm here to do, I can't remember what it was with this client, 6 months of work, and then stopping after 3 months. It's not okay to do that, actually, for me. But quite a powerful thing to, like an act of service, I think, actually, for you to be saying that to the clients, because probably no one else says it to them, to be honest.
Right. I know it's a pattern, right? Because I know them because I know what we're working on. I'm like, you're doing the thing again, right? And you can't see it maybe right now, and it's okay. And I love you, and you're doing it. And where I get to really look on my side is, did I do more work in enrollment than they did? Right? Did I really try to move them across the finish line? Because that's an indication of like, oh yeah, something wasn't right, and I ignored it before we started. Was I really holding onto their vision for them? Was I, like, so there's tremendous learning in those, kind of to look at like, where did I have a hunch that they might quit that I didn't listen to, or we didn't bring to the surface earlier.
And maybe this takes us to like into the book. We've talked about the origin of the book a bit, but one of the really nice bits that I came across in the book was, you're gonna have to give me you're gonna have to catch the language that I get slightly wrong, but it's something like, thinking about the clients, I guess, at that enrollment stage, about what they want and maybe what they need, but also, and amongst what their breakthroughs might be. And then really, like, I think one of the things that I don't think I've ever heard anybody say explicitly in the way that you do in that book before. So maybe I don't know if it's original, but it's original to me. Was like, what's the thing for me here as the coach? What's the breakthrough that might be being asked of me in this work? And feel free to correct the kind of language there. And I guess I'm curious a little bit to hear why that matters, and how, I guess, one of the things that, as I discussed that with a client today, actually, because I could really see how it was playing out for, this is a coach, could see how it was playing out for him with a prospective client. And so here's your book, Doing Work When You Don't Know That It's Doing It. So it's nice to be able to tell that. It's like, we held that idea together and looked at it. And it's like, it's an interesting thing to hold, that idea of the breakthrough. How is this work for us as well as for the client? And I guess, I'm curious if you could say something about that whole thing. It's not really a question.
The origin was when I was working with Bay and she was my coach. I celebrated. I was like, I signed a client. She was like, cool, awesome. What are they helping you to create? And I was like, F you, Bay, right? Like, you're immediately turning the mirror around. So I love you as a coach. Yeah. So she offered that. And then I think on the next call, I turned it into this, like, the 4 question: their wants, their need, their wants are what they bring, as verbatim as I can. This is what they say they want in coaching. Their needs are what I suspect is kind of a deeper underlying thing that would serve them. Their breakthrough, again, is a guess. What high level that's, we're talking about, like, what's the thing we were talking about earlier, kind of like, if this shifts, what else? And then what's my breakthrough? So I got it from Bay, and then sort of, systematized it in my practice. And what's so important for me in it is it helps me to predict where I'm going to get caught or hooked, as I say in the book, with this client. Because if we're doing good work, it's going to happen. And
just say, what do you mean by hooked?
Yeah, hooked is generally if when I want something to be other than it is. So if I'm annoyed with the person, I'm hooked by the current situation. Or if if I want life to be different, I'm currently hooked. And the way that shows up for me as a coach is, if I think my client's being annoying, I am hooked. Or if I think that their goal is actually impossible, then there's a place for me to look at, like, how am I limiting myself or limiting the world or limiting them? Like, where am I not being clean as a coach? And that's a place that I can look for a potential breakthrough for me. And why I think it's important is that I think it's important that fundamentally that we as coaches continue to be looking at our own growth opportunities if we're doing good work. I mean, it's just kind of like, I think, is the nature of the beast. And I find that the more that we do it explicitly, whether or not we're right, if we do it explicitly or put it into practice, the better we get at it and the more kind of good stuff can happen. It also alerts me to, again, like, this is what I can look out for as a coach or get ready to bring to my coach to be supported as I'm supporting this person.
Yeah, it's cool. I just caught that. I don't know if you're doing this deliberately. I guess you've worked with Toku, so I know he talks a lot about deliberate practice, those kind of things. But that's one of the things when I remember reading about one of those deliberate practice researchers, it's like one of the ways to improve your capacity in anything really, but your intuitions is to like make a guess and then compare it with reality, essentially. So it's like, it would be to watch if you were doing this as coaching, the way that I've thought about doing it before is you watch someone else's coaching session, something happens, you pause, you think, what would I do? And maybe you'd have a few ideas of that. And then you watch what they do and you watch what happened. And then you go back to what you thought you would do and reflect on it. And that's a way of training yourself. And I'm just getting that this practice that you've designed is probably also why you're catching those things earlier, right? Because you're training yourself each time you do it to, okay, if you look back at that at the end of the coaching program, then you're really training yourself. It's like, oh, I thought it was going to be this, and I was kind of right, but actually there was this whole thing I missed. As well as, like you said, the advantage of being ready to get the coaching, the supervision, it's like by naming, I really get it, by naming what your breakthrough might be, you just make it much less likely that the reason you need that breakthrough gets in the way of the other person.
It's like also a practice of, it's okay for me to be human in this, right? If I am intentional at the beginning of saying I'm gonna get hooked, then when it happens, I can add so much less significance to it. It's not a big deal. And at least that's important for me as a coach and as a human. Like, the more I can, increasingly I'm saying it, normalizing human experiences. Just accept that this thing is going to happen. We don't create it by that, but just like say it's okay if it does, then it's way easier to kind of work through. Very similarly, one of the things I do now with new clients is before we go fully to yes, or before our first onboarding call, I have them write, what are all the ways you're going to try to screw this up? How are you going to get in your own way in our work together? How are you going to try to quit? What's going to show up? If I have clients who are in a new relationship, I have them write, like, how are all of your survival mechanisms going to try to screw up this relationship? Let's just get them on paper. And then when they show up, we can celebrate because it means we're on track.
Yeah. I'm going to steal that one straight away. That's going in my intake. It's really good. It's really good. Matt, this is, let's do, a big part of the book is a GPS analogy. My favorite bit of the GPS analogy that I've come across, like I said, I haven't read all of the book, is this beautiful story you tell about being in Madrid and the difference about how you know Madrid compared to how you know even where you live now.
Yeah.
And I just think it's such a good, you can tell it, but I just think for me, it gets to that bit is what, as analogies or metaphors often are, it gets to one of the most fundamental reasons why I believe in coaching, as opposed to many other ways of helping people. So I just wondered if you could just give us a little bit of that story.
Yeah, happy to. And then I want to hear how you were kind of relating to it, because I want to learn that. So when I was in college, I studied in Madrid for 6 months, and this was in 2005. So the phone that I had at the time was a prepaid little brick kind of phone that could send text messages and like call, and that was it. I think it had Snake as the game, that kind of. And so what that means is that I didn't have Google Maps to help me identify or get around the city. I had paper maps. I had the maps that were around the city and in the subway, and Otherwise, I just learned the city. And I realize now that I have Google Maps, I live in Denver, that I know Denver, even my own neighborhood, sometimes around here, way less. I don't know street names. I can sort of feel stuff, but generally I GPS everywhere I go. Even if it's pretty close, just to see traffic. Like I kind of use that as like, I just want to know if there's any crazy traffic. And the side effect is that a couple of years ago, I went back to Madrid and we were able to navigate to a bar we used to go to all of the time. And I definitely made wrong terms. It was a longer route than it needed to be, but I could get there. And it's simply because like my body has internalized a knowledge of the city. It's still here even after it's like 15, 18, however many, lots of years. I'm feeling old now. And it's similarly, yesterday I just got back from Nashville, which is where I lived a few stops ago. And a similar thing where like, I know I can get anywhere in the city now. It was highly inefficient routes, but I knew that I could get anywhere. And it was just like, I am acutely aware of how much I now, and I suspect we outsource our direction making capability and even our decision making capability to external things. In this case, it's Google Maps. And in the book, I talk about just generally society, about how we allow others to decide our directions for us.
Yeah, it's great, and I'm aware it's partly I think it's great because I've had similar thoughts myself before, so it's validating for that. But well, my example. So we recently moved to the West Midlands near Birmingham in England, and partly to be near my wife's parents. And my wife's dad knows he always loves to talk about road names and like I don't know, I can't remember how it works in the US. I think no, you have like numbered highways and things, don't you? Like it's the same here. All those like the B whatever, we have A roads and B roads and motorways, that kind of thing, which are highways. And he'll like, oh, did you come along this road and that road? And I'm like, I don't know. Like I never know the answer to that, because you're bonding with your father-in-law. It's like, yeah or no, depending on that about that level of certainty. And he knows the country differently to me, but I'm really aware that, and I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing with travel, right? Because one of the things that the technology allows us to do is remove the weight from our functioning of needing to know how to get anywhere. And the metaphor, and there is a knowing of a place that's really wonderful. And I'm enjoying now I'm here. To be honest, I couldn't have, before we moved here, I couldn't have pointed to even which direction which town is, even the ones of which of stations I've been picked up and dropped off from many times. And it is a different thing now to be living here, to be able to know which town is that way and which one is that way and which way is north, and those things, which amazingly, despite coming here for getting on 10 years before we moved last year, I couldn't do. And the reason I think that it lands so much for me with coaching is just because it speaks to that in a way, like, well, it's like, is it a developmental shift? I don't know. It's like when I ran so I had a really fun time. God, is it only last year ago? Maybe 2 years, maybe 21 into 22, I think, running some coaching training for a consultancy who wanted to train some coaches. And through a series of fortunate events, me and my friend Mike ended up doing it. And we had a wonderful time really recreating the training course that we'd both studied. And one of the moves that in some ways, the reason I wish I'd had that metaphor is because one of the moves that I think is hard early on for some people as they're coming to coaching is understanding why it's better to ask the question than give the answer to the person you're trying to help. And if I'd had that metaphor when I was teaching these people, like, I think they got it, but I think that would have brought that home much more, in a much more grounded and full way. I think the reason that metaphors or poetry works is because it gets a complex concept better than prose. I don't think that's an original thought, but that's like what I love about it. It's like they'd have just kind of sunk into that because they could understand what it'd be like to have your Madrid level knowledge of themselves versus your Denver level knowledge of themselves, right? You can feel why the Madrid level knowledge would be preferable. And I think, I can't remember if you named it in the story now or if I read it in the book, that the time in Madrid was short, right? Compared to the time that you might have lived in in Denver or some of the other places that you've lived. It's
Yeah.
like you can it doesn't necessarily take that long to
Right.
get that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was 6 months compared to, years in some of these other places. And this is, I think, related to both we talked about being in this practice of as a coach of identifying our own breakthrough, identifying or at least guessing what our clients might need. All of this to me is it's a practice of learning to look inward and trust ourselves for ourselves as a coach, and then for our clients. I think coaching fundamentally is getting in lots and lots of reps of what do I want, where am I now, and then how do I move. And it's like that simple over and over again, but it brings up so much for us.
Yeah, just to catch it, sorry, Matt, to do this, but
yeah,
for people who don't want to read the book, Matt's just really nicely summarized that. Those are the kind of key, that's the key move, right? What is it like? What do I want? Where am I now? And how do I move? Yeah.
Yeah. And what's in between, right?
And then if you, what you get in the book, which is great, just to make people actually want to buy it, is you get to double click on all of that, right? In textured ways. So, yeah, it is that. And I guess in there, I caught like that. I think we, maybe in that, this is a new thing that I had when you were talking just then, like in that metaphor is something like the Madrid level knowledge is more integrated, so that the GPS for me, sometimes what we're outsourcing, like what we want to is for me, the struggle is I'm outsourcing it to my, not to the world necessarily, but to my thinking self, which is not able to know the things that a more integrated version of me is able to know. And that's kind of, probably always and forever my work.
I hope so. And that's why I think it's so worth asking the question personally. People ask me like, how do I know if it's my ego versus my desire? I'm like, I don't think you know until you try it. Like, I don't think it's an intellectual exercise to try to distinguish between this. I think we get to move and experiment and be in the muck of it, and then find out, and then hope, get better next time, practice again.
Yeah, lovely. Man, I'm aware we're coming vaguely towards the end of the time now. Like, I feel like there's a kind of, we've talked about it in the concept of the big goals with the book. We talked about it in the concept of those big goals. Like anyone listening can kind of feel from you those impossible goals, and how the book, even in just the brief ways we've touched on it, contributes to that. Obviously, particularly that second goal. But what's important about the book and what it does in the world to you? And then maybe, if it works, to segue from there into how you birthed it into the world through the publishing process, which we kind of name checked before, and I don't want to miss out on.
Yeah. So first, this book is the book that I wish I had before I got into the dojo, when I was an early coach. And like, not a how-to book on coaching, because I don't think that's what coaching is, but how do I know if I'm directionally on target? How do I know if I'm starting to do the thing, and what does it actually mean for me to be a coach? So that's what I try to answer. I mean, my hope is that every coach in the world will read this, right? Like, I think everyone can gain some sort of perspective from this thing. And then secondly, it's the book that I will return to over and over again as a coach, because again, like, I'm coming from the context that this work never ends. There's always a place for me to look, and there's always something I'm not looking at that I could go deeper in. And I've read the book 9 times already by now, including the last time was me recording the audiobook, which hopefully it should be out by the time this episode comes out. And there was a moment like a week or two before the launch date when I was reading, and I just looked at Kristen and I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is good. If I just applied this, I would feel better right now. And she's like, yeah, your launch would go a lot easier if you listen to that guy. He's smart, right? Like, and it's so humbling for me as a human and as a coach and as someone who thinks has answers sometimes, to like read the thing that came out of my brain and then be like, oh, I completely forgot that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's lovely. And then, tell me about I want to pick your brains on audiobooks, because that's like my vague, if I had a goal for this year, it might be to get around to doing
Cool.
that. But tell me, like, publishing, you said that the process of writing the book was quite through me, but the publishers was kind of happened through you, but the publishing felt difficult, I think you said earlier in this conversation. So what happened during the publishing process, and what decisions did you make, and what did you learn?
So I chose to go with a marketing team. They mostly do a lot of personal branding, but I've launched a number of books. And then sort of consultant editors to help out, instead of going with a hybrid publishing or even trying to pitch to a publisher. And I realized at some point in the process a few things. One, my marketing team and I had different ideas about what different phases of the process meant. So the advanced copies for me, I wanted to get feedback during those. For them, they were like basically finished books just to get reviews and endorsements. And so we kept running up against differences in timelines. And I got to distinguish that I hired them so that I could lead the process when I really needed to manage more of the process. If folks are just familiar with the distinction of leadership versus management, I had to manage a lot more of the process than I imagined I would. And that is draining for me. It's really actually something I try to step out of. And I can often put leadership on a pedestal. And so it's sort of like, I don't want to do this. I was resisting. So there's like that whole thing. There was, I'm afraid, I really appreciate you giving, Jeff a shout out, a positive shout out. I had another friend who runs a podcast who did not like Jeff's outreach, and I got to receive that. And I got some friends who sent feedback of, hey, the direct messages that I'm receiving from your team to invite me to your group, they sound like spam. And so I got to the stuff that I'm mostly worried about, which is that the people in my life will no longer trust me. I'll be alone, and they'll hate me. I got to be confronted with that on a consistent basis. And I got to ask for help from people that I didn't expect to or haven't talked to in a number of years. And so it was a fundamental identity shift that sort of sideswiped me, because the writing was pretty painless. And so I was like, the publishing should be painless. All of the consultants and book launch people I talk to, everyone makes a huge deal out of sitting down and writing. And so since there was very little attention kind of placed on the other side, I thought there would be not much to it. But like that was the opposite. And then so I also did a lot like, what's wrong with me? It shouldn't be this hard. I didn't anticipate this. So all of that. And then meanwhile, I'm putting so much energy and attention into the book launch that my business is not going well according to how I imagined it should. I had imposter syndrome. Who's going to trust a book by a guy whose business isn't going well, right? Like it was like all of that.
Tough. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, isn't it interesting? There's so much. I mean, it is like, I think it is a very courageous thing to create, this book that you've created, for that last reason that you said, right? It takes to let, I guess what I catch is the person who admires courage and creativity. That's a big part of who I am. I'm really aware that like you had to let it come through you. Then you had to not get lost in, who am I to write a book called This Is Coaching? When you do have a lot of coaching success compared to a lot of coaches, but by most people's definitions of coaching success, there are more people with more success than you, and yet you're the one writing this book, right? So it's like you got through that. Then you got through the kind of mess of the publishing and all the stuff it can bring up, and the book is out, and that is out. So well done.
Thanks for seeing all of that and acknowledging it.
Yeah. And one of the things I learned, I guess, from doing the 4 was the next one is much easier to publish. So the publishing process for the second one was, obviously, but I didn't expect it to be that much. I had the same thing. I didn't expect it to be as hard with the first one, but I also didn't expect it to get as much easier with the second, just from knowing, for me, it was a lot about like every decision required learning a whole new aspect of publishing, which I didn't know about. That was painful. And then mostly for future ones, you just do the same thing that you did last time. That's okay. And just to catch it for people, because I think we said this before we switched on, The funny thing about this is about how this interview came to happen is it really happened because Toku and I are speaking again for a return to him coming back on the show, and he recommended you as part of that exchange of emails as a guest. He recommended Matt, and I was like, I know Matt's name, and I've heard of Pylea before. What is that? And then I went back through my emails, and I found emails from one of Matt's team, Jeff, doing what I thought. I genuinely meant that. I thought were like it. Well, obviously, it was enough. It was A, relevant enough to me, and B, well enough written email that I had been on your website and looked up Pylea, and I'm pretty sure added you to my spreadsheet with potential guests for the future before Toku's nudge. You often need a second nudge to make something actually happen. So I think at least, and like the endorsements, the reviews, like that team has obviously also done some work on that, which is great. And I'm glad there's an audiobook coming, because I think hearing that book and the way it's written in your voice, I imagine that'll be an impactful thing for people too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Matt, I loved you sent through. Regular listeners will have heard me say this before, but it's because I like it. One of the questions I ask is basically for talking points from you, and you said that some of them came from Kristen. And I always love it when, so the question I ask to guests, for people who are listening and who haven't maybe said this before, is what would a close friend or someone who knows your journey really well tell me to ask you about? And I love it when people actually get someone to answer some of them. So I think like half of the ones you sent were from her, or you'd said it's from her. So thank you, Kristen, because they're such beautiful ones in it. Maybe because you said that, but it felt like you could just feel that they were questions from somebody else. And I really
they were not what I would have put in there.
But you could feel you could feel that bit of her that you mentioned before, where she says, "Yeah, you should probably listen to this guy who wrote this book." I felt that in them as well. And there are two that I want to make sure I ask. The first is, it speaks to so much of what we spoke about. How do you maintain passion for this work in a culture that doesn't really understand it? Like, it's just such a beautiful question that I think speaks to the experience of lots of coaches who struggle to do that. And sometimes that's definitely been me. I think mostly I can do that. But yeah, what's your, what comes up with that question? How do you do that?
A few things. One, I think this is partly coming because we were in Nashville, and I mentioned I was seeing an old friend, and I was expressing like, hey, it's hard for me to feel in belonging often in Michigan, where we grew up, and some other places. And Denver is a place where I feel like I've really found that. And I felt difficult at first to get him to receive that. And I was like, you're doing exactly the thing. And it was like this, like a little emotional tension moment where I was like, I don't want your advice. I want you to hear me. And so I think part of that, like Kristen noticed it. She's seen that we go to parties and people ask me what I do. And I say I'm a coach, and like, that's nice. And then they like move on. And I just so deeply desire people to like ask, like, what is that about? Like to like lean in just a half a second. But I really get that it can be frightening for them, that they don't want to look stupid, that they want to, like it can be confronting. Like just generally my being can be a bit confronting. So that's a bit of what the context of what Kristen was sharing. So one, now, especially that I live here in Denver, and I spoke to finding my people in the dojo, is to spend more and more time with people who get it. And not all of my time. I also intentionally, I am not the guy who only hangs out in coaching circles. That would also be terrible for me too much. I need to go hang out with my buddies who talk about fantasy football and, all that other stuff. But part of it is like knowing what feeds me, like increasingly getting an idea of like, being around these people really feed me, and they need deep conversations outside of coaching conversations so that I can feel like other people actually want this too. And then the second thing is, it's sort of like golf, which is like we hit 100 shots for like the 2 good shots in the whole round. And so when my clients come to me and they're like, oh my gosh, I see it. They like have an insight or have made a change completely outside of our coaching conversation for a thing that we've been talking about for 2 years or however long, like I go, this is the best. Like, why would I do anything other than this? Oh my gosh. Like, this is the most fulfilling thing I could ever imagine. And that, obviously that can't happen in every conversation, but when it does, it's enough for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. The other, I mean, you kind of, in a way, you've kind of touched on, I think, probably what's behind this. The other one that I liked was what your feeling is for where coaches find community and other coaches. And I know that that's a part of the work that I do, and I know that it's important. I hear it from them. What's your feeling about that? Or what do you say to that one? This is another.
We so need it in the same way that there's like the trite saying of like, put your own oxygen mask on first. Like, man, if you're going to support someone in a community, you better damn well go find your own community, because like that's the way to actually be able to transmit that energy. And you know, one of the I'll share a couple of my own breakthroughs. One has been as I've like chosen to worry less about what people think of me or worry that I'm not enough, I can accept them where they are more. Just not just coaching clients, but like anyone who's a coach. I can be quite judgy. Just like, you're not a good enough coach, I don't trust you. You know, like I kind of spoken to that a few times. Like it's definitely one of my so part of it is like just choosing to love, choosing to just be like, I'm here and this is a community and it's not perfect, and I'm just gonna freaking love you. Like I'm just gonna feel welcome and choose to see that you love me and like choose to receive that. And so learning to do that has been really helpful. And then secondly, like showing up in places I might be a little bit afraid to show up, where like if I'm intimidated by, if it's the reverse where I'm intimidated by people, to like show up and choose to belong. And that is not necessarily always in coaching communities, or sometimes it is with coaches I might be intimidated by.
Yeah, lovely. And I the chapter in one of my books, which unfortunately, like, is a story my brother told me once, and I can't remember. Neither of us could remember who said this. Like, neither of us came up with this framework, but this idea that we actually need 3 types of community on our journey. We actually need some people who are kind of speech marks behind us. And we need some people who are speech marks ahead of us, and we need some people that are alongside us. And I think you kind of have touched on all 3 of those in this conversation. And if any listeners, I always say this whenever I talk about that story, if any listeners know where that framework comes from, who said it, would love to know. Matt, we've talked a lot about the kind of breadth of your work and the different ways you've created things. We've touched on a bunch of them, from the one-to-one work to the TEDx talk to now the book. One of the it's a really nice question from one of the members of the Coach's Journey community. Some of them can ask questions, and he said, how do you think about the interplay between that deeper work and the lighter touch work? And how do you personally value those different types of things you do, and how do they satisfy you in either, does some satisfy more, or do they just satisfy different ways? How do you think about all the different types of work that you've done, from TEDx talk to the book to the deep one-to-one work, I guess the group work, time at Pylea?
Yeah, I really love this. I've been thinking about it a lot, especially with ChatGPT coming and people are talking about, is AI going to replace coaches? So I can sometimes tend to the like, the deeper is better. That's why Toku and I are bros. And you know, I think this book was the first, it was sort of a coming out of like my soul being like, dude, you got to share a thing that isn't only like deep one-on-one time with you. And so I think it's extremely valuable. And increasingly I'm seeing like, asking, how can I meet people exactly where they are, and allow wherever they are to be okay, and to not try to force them, again, like looking where I'm doing the heavy lifting and enrollment, not force them into this kind of deep thing with me one-on-one. And so on the backside of the book, I am still in the process of creating systems for this, not exactly where I want to be, but sharing more content on social media, sharing more content just broadly online, some more thought leadership sort of stuff as a way to kind of give those bites to people. I think they're so important, right? Like it's easy to like dismiss Instagram quotes, and like, if they serve a purpose, they serve a purpose, right? Also look at, are you stuck there? But like, acknowledge if they're serving a purpose, right? And let that actually be, and celebrate that win. So that, and then in the next year or 2, would love to have a Matt chat bot, an AI bot that is based on this is coaching. And this is another reason I want to create more stuff, so that people can kind of meet me and have part of that. It won't be called coaching, but it's like, it's learning, and to me, it's more teaching than it is coaching, right? It's that like facilitative, this is some knowledge I have and I want to share that with you. So I definitely want to bring that to the world. And then hopefully invite people into deeper conversations, right? And to say like, cool, my time is limited. I want to have up to 10 clients. I really want to be able to have focused work on my creative stuff. So that's got to limit my client time. And I want to keep experimenting. So how do I keep doing cool, deep stuff in the midst of that?
Yeah. Beautiful, great answer, Matt. It's so useful. I'm aware I said we were kind of coming to the end of our time quite a while ago now. We actually are now. Is there anything, before we wrap up, is there anything that we haven't talked about that it feels important to say or share in this moment?
I'll just like piggyback on the other things that I'm experimenting with now that the book is out.
What's coming up?
Because there's actually a practice for me in this of I'm really good at like the TEDx talk, shipping a piece of art and then be like, what's the next thing? Because I'm already interested in something else. And I'm trying that, you probably know this, you're thinking about this with your books, like how do I stick with this piece of work for a while and really honor it? So I'm developing a group coaching pilot program for coaches to take the lessons of the book deeper. It'll be called Mastering the Coaching Game. Really excited about that. And the first group program that I format that I've developed on my own. The first that I like just me, which is really fun. And then secondly, as part of this experimentation and higher leverage deep work, for the last year and a half, I've been calling in something called the Magnum Opus Project, which is a program designed for someone who is financially doesn't need anything. They've probably had a liquidity exit. They're set. They don't need to work, but their soul needs to create what I call their masterpiece. And the idea is the curiosity is if we had tons of resources, tons of commitment, and could create what I call the ideal support party to help someone shift into the thing they're here to do, what could we do? And so it's a really interesting, like a curious kind of look into this like super deep, super intense, high touch work that has not happened yet, but I'm excited to kind of bring.
And I love that you can feel it. I can feel it. And you're making it more real by speaking about it now. So yeah, that's super cool. Yeah. Matt, we could feel like we could do this for hours. And I was saying to you before we switched on that there's a weird time in my life right now, and my energy is quite depleted. And yet, a couple of hours in your presence, and I'm feeling really, really beautiful. So thank you for that, because it means I'm going to go and get to do bedtime with Leah, my daughter now, and she's not very well, so I get to go in instead of often as I am the end of a day of work feeling drained. I'm going to get to go in feeling really alive. So that's more of your work rippling on to little redheaded toddlers in Warwickshire. It's been a real pleasure, Matt. Thanks so much for this from me and from the listeners.
Thanks, Robbie.